Hello! Welcome to Introduction to Nutrition. This is Dr. Meredith Butalis, your course instructor here, and we are going to have a 6-week whirlwind tour of nutrition concepts. Now, before we dig in, quick overview of what we will study and what we won't study. Sometimes people come into fitness thinking, oh, I'm going to study the stability ball, I'm going to study Tabata workouts. And we might talk about how and why to use those things as tools, but we don't say, oh, I'm only going to work out on stability balls, typically. Same thing happens in nutrition. People come into it and they're like, oh, my friend did this paleo diet. I'm using the word paleo diet because that is the big term in media right now. It's in bookstores, it's on TV, it's on the radio, it's on the internet, it's on the social media. And I'm not going to say it's good or bad or that everybody should do it or should not, but we're not here to focus on fad diets or temporary diets. And you might say, whoa, 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 that's not a fad. And I don't know. We don't know where that is going right now, but we can look at our trends and we could say there have definitely been things over time that attracted the pop media, and then we decided to go back to some standards for the average person. Now, are there reasons to deviate? Are there reasons to go other ways? Are there reasons to follow other methods? Absolutely. But this is an evidence-based course. And in this course, we look at the body's fuel, how it's processed, and what some of those current evidence or research-based guidelines are that drive our foundations, especially when we're not paired with a registered dietitian. So we will focus on evidence-based. We will use the USDA guidelines as our foundation. Not to say we won't look at other things, but that is the foundation of this course, being an introduction to nutrition. And we'll understand food as a fuel and how it's processed and how we can start manipulating that to achieve different kinds of goals and outcomes. We're not going to spend a lot of time on other foundational methods, but we do mention them and we do give you some references as we go. And we definitely can't give you the rights of a registered dietitian. So if you want to do meal plans, that's a big no-no. You need to become a registered dietitian in most states. If you want to coach people that have special medical conditions, another big no-no. You're going to need special licenses in states to be able to do that. Now you might say, well, what about nutrition coaching? I've heard about nutrition coaching. Can I do that? It depends on your state law. This is not in your textbook. This is beyond your textbook. But if you go to nutritionadvocacy.org and then look up the state laws, you can see state by state whether your specific state of residence or work would allow any liberty for nutrition coaching if you do not have a licensure or additional certification. So definitely look at your state laws before you go too far with this. But why nutrition? Well, whether you can provide some coaching yourself or some tracking yourself based off your state laws, or whether you're going to need to pair with a registered dietitian to go in depth with that, we do know that nutrition is a really big component of almost every one of your fitness or exercise clients or lifestyle clients' goals. It is the baseline fuel for the body. It influences how we feel. It influences weight loss. It influences immune health. And when we look at our athletic people or people who are exercising a lot, it influences performance. We can get into specific modifications and nutrient timing to enhance endurance, to enhance power, to enhance agility, to enhance eye coordination. It's really interesting what we can do with this fuel source. We can also use it to decrease injury or recover from surgeries faster. I work alongside a colleague at RD who really specializes in how she coaches nutrition to recovery from surgery faster, which is really some very interesting work. We can use it to decrease fatigue, we can use it to enhance recovery, and we could definitely use it to peak performance. One you've probably all heard about, carb loading, endurance athletes. That's an example of using a fuel at a specific time to peak a specific performance. With people who are really active and have sports and athletic goals, we can get into periodization too. So you might remember from your fitness classes that with people that have specific goals, we do something called periodization. which is where we specifically manipulate the acute variables of their workout, so sets, reps, rest, load, recovery periods, to then decide whether we want to bias towards endurance or stabilization or hypertrophy or strength or maximal power or maximum agility at different points in the season. And then we can match the nutrition onto that, where we start varying ratios of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and other potential supplements. We will get into that in future units. But a couple of key terms. I'm not going to go over every key term in your textbook. Please, please, please do take a reader through chapter 1 and 2 to go over all of those key terms. But I'm going to go over a couple of the ones that seem just a little bit more confusing, especially if the last time you took a nutrition course was maybe more than 5 years ago. So the DRI, really important, dietary reference intake. It is currently our standard to assess the amounts of food groups for individuals. It does have a built-in margin of safety, so it's not an exact number, and it built upon and replaced our previous recommended daily allowances, RDAs. If a food or a substance like a vitamin or a mineral doesn't have an RDA, we use something called an AI, which is an adequate intake. When you look at a food label, something that is really confusing, and it confuses a lot of your clients, is that highlighted purple column there, the thing on the right where it says percent of daily value. What people fail to account for is that that is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So if you are not on a 2,000 calorie diet, your needs might be different than those percentages. That's an education point that we can have with our clients, even if we are not in a state where nutrition coaching is allowed. We can still educate on some basic information. There's also MyPlate, which is the foundation of what we'll be using in this course, but there's something called an athlete's pyramid developed by the Swiss. And it wasn't meant to replace the MyPlate guidelines, it just offers a little additional information for populations in which it was validated. That's important, in which it was validated. Notice it's a pretty narrow age range, 20 to 35-year-olds, 50 to 85 kilograms, who are exercising pretty aggressively 5 to 28 hours per week. So for people that do fit that particular classification, if you look on the right of this, and I'm not going to expand it right now because it's right out of your textbook, per hour of exercise, it gives you some additional guidelines on fluids, grains, and good fats to add to your program. Now when we look at sports nutrition basics, you might wonder, how much carbohydrate does somebody need? How much fat does somebody need? How do I even calculate that? You realize it's pretty variable because it is based also on the athlete's size, the athlete's gender, and the type of activity. You might remember that things like all-out sprinting are a little bit more anaerobic, so you're going to have more carbohydrate utilization. You might remember that long distances, like marathons, you're going to have carbohydrate utilization because you draw on your glycogen stores. So different kinds of activities have different demands. But the average for carbohydrate is 3 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. The average for protein is 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then they recommend that fat needs are determined last. So once you know the total calories needed for that day or that mesocycle, depending on how it's been periodized for the nutrition plan, you determine the fat needs last, estimated at 20 to 35% of caloric intake, and going below 20% does not enhance performance and may actually jeopardize it. You might remember the low fat phase that everybody went through years ago, but what did those manufacturers do? They loaded everything up with sugar instead, and we discovered that didn't work. People still gained weight, and we lost a lot of the benefits from the good fats when people took them out of their diets. We'll talk about what that is later on. And then we can get into nutrient timing, which is how you time your nutrients relative to your activities. I'll give you a quick example here of how you might introduce nutrient timing and how you might introduce the concept of working with a registered dietitian to somebody who is athletic. I had somebody I know, she emailed me, and she's a professional dancer, and she had just increased her activity by quite a bit. and her doctor, she needed a doctor's signature to be performing with this next company she had been accepted to. And the doctor said, I'm not signing off until your body mass index is in something resembling the normal range, because it was about 14. And you might know that is extremely low. And so she emails me and she goes, what exercises should I do to increase my BMI? So my doctor will sign off, but I want to make sure I don't gain muscle. And you might realize that from a exercise physiology perspective, that doesn't make sense, because she basically inferred that she wanted to gain fat, and we knew that that also was not true. So how did we approach this? I said, well, you're doing a lot of exercise, and I think your answer is probably going to lie in nutrient timing. She goes, well, what is that? I go, well, that's how you time the intake of your food and the amount of your food based off of the activities you perform that day. She goes, oh, that sounds interesting. I'd be up for that conversation. So we connected her with a registered dietitian. Now, in addition to food, we know that food is our baseline fuel, but there are some supplement considerations, and your book goes into great detail on this. I'm just going to highlight a few of the key points. So we know that we have the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act of 1994. When that came out, people were, especially supplement stores, were terrified. They're like, oh, we're going to lose all our supplements, we're going to lose all our customers, we're going to be forced to close. And that really wasn't true at all. What it governed was vitamins and minerals, herbs and botanicals, amino acids, metabolites, constituents, extracts, and just about everything else that wasn't a macronutrient. And what it required was that supplements have fact labels on them. But what it did not require is safety. Nothing being sold had to be tested or proven for safety, and nothing being sold had to be proven to be effective. That is still true today. There's a couple of caveats here we'll talk about, but in general, to consume a supplement, it does not have to be safe and it doesn't have to be effective in the US. The FDA can remove or recall a product if it is proven unsafe. So one big example I remember, it was Muscle Milk, really, really common protein shake, ready-to-go product, and they ended up recalling it for arsenic levels. Its arsenic level was too high, and you might realize that arsenic is also synonymous with rat poison. So it's really important to say, okay, I don't know if some of these things are safe or not. The other thing is, if you are working with competitive athletes, or if you are a competitive athlete yourself, most of those are going to be governed by the IOC or the NCAA. And if the athlete is found to be taking a banned substance, they're going to be disqualified. And that can be it can be a lifelong ban. So really, really important to consider those guidelines and ask if the supplements your athlete is taking are in line with those guidelines. And there's not a great way to know, but they do recommend that you at least have your dietary supplements labeled by one of the certifying programs, indicating that there's not a banned substance. And those 4 major bodies for the US are the ConsumerLab.com, NSF, US Pharmacopedia, and Informed Choice. So if it doesn't have that label, you might want to steer clear with your competitive athletes. So in conclusion of this quick introductory lecture, we've talked a little bit about scope of practice and where you can find a little more information on that, especially if you are not a registered dietitian. We've introduced MyPlate and food labels, which please become familiar with those. I'm kind of assuming you've already been exposed to those. If not, your text has some information, and I included the website. We've gone over a little bit of key terminology and a little bit of differences in athletic guidelines versus just using Choose My Plate. And we've gone over a couple of key considerations for supplementation. So I hope that this introduction has proven to be helpful and drawn your attention to some key elements we're going to be continuing to consider. And please feel free to reach out as any questions arise. Thank you.